This is Where We Live from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Catherine Shen. Dating in 2024 can be tough. There are no shortage of stories about dating in the age of Tinder, Bumble, Hinge, and more. But today, we're going to talk about dating and falling in love when you're an older adult. Last fall, the spin-off show for The Bachelor, The Golden Bachelor, started a national conversation about falling in love in midlife and beyond. Today, we hear from experts about dating in this age range, and we'll even get to hear some love stories that will put The Notebook, written by Nicholas Sparks, to shame. Joining us now is Dr. Kristina Zdanys. She's an associate professor of psychiatry and division chief for Geriatric Psychiatry and Behavioral Health at UConn. Thank you so much, Dr. Zdanys, for being with us today.
It's a pleasure to be here, Catherine. Thank you.
And also with us is Chip Conley, who's the founder and CEO of the Modern Elder Academy, which is a school that's dedicated to midlife transitions. Thank you so much, Chip, for being on Where We Live today.
It's great to be here.
And for our listeners, if you're dating or you have fallen in love at any age, we want to hear from you. So I want to start with you, Dr. Zdanys. We're talking about dating as an older adult. Can you tell us what the data is saying right now?
Yeah, so what we know is that 36% of adults over the age of 65 are single. It's slightly skewed by gender. So over the age of 65, 49% of women and 21% of men would be considered single. And about 16% of single people over the age of 85 are actively seeking a romantic relationship.
And are those numbers surprising? Or is that pretty, I don't want to use the word typical because I know there's no typical situation, but does that seem to be relatively normal?
I think that there's more dating happening now than years and years ago, right? I think, for example, if you think about somebody who was widowed, maybe back in the 50s, 60s, 70s, even 80s, it was kind of like a Little Red Riding Hood grandma image, right? Where Little Red Riding Hood's grandma, she might have been like 65, but she was portrayed as living alone in a little cottage, doing her thing, right? But I think now people are living longer, they're living healthier, and they're realizing that they have an opportunity to seek other romantic relationships.
And Chip, what do you hear people from the Elder Academy say about dating? Are you hearing something similar?
Yeah. So the Modern Elder Academy, we have about 4,000 alums from 47 countries, and average age is about 55. So what we have seen, and actually about over 60% are women, we definitely see the challenge that a lot of women feel with that statistic that Kristina mentioned, which is 49% versus 21%. In terms of the percentage of people who are single, with women having a much more of a predominance. I think one of the things that I've noticed more than anything is women who are considering themselves age fluid. What is age fluid? It means someone who is not necessarily defined by their chronological age or their generation. And therefore, they don't say like, oh, okay, I have to meet someone who's older than me or who's my age. And so what that does is it opens up more possibilities for dating. And again, based upon the data, that's an important piece of it if you're a heterosexual woman.
And I mean, with both of you just mentioning that the data skews towards women, can you talk about, are there reasons for that? What does the data, inform you of why it skews towards women?
Well, I think largely it's because women are living longer, and that's for a variety of reasons, and that's been historical, right? So historically, people who are in the older adult category now, men were much more likely to smoke or drink heavily, or have other risk factors for cardiovascular disease, diabetes, et cetera. So I think that's kind of the underlying reason why there's so many more women who are older.
And both of you also mentioned some unique challenges when it comes to dating in this age. So I want to ask Dr. Zdanys, can you talk about some of those unique challenges and opportunities when you're dating in this age range?
Sure. Well, I mean, just starting very basically, and I think it's important also to acknowledge that we're talking about a very broad age range. There's a very big difference between being 50 and 75 and 100, right?
Absolutely.
But I think there's challenges in terms of identifying goals for a relationship, right? So Are people looking for marriage? Are people looking for a companion to go out to lunch with once a week? Are people looking for somebody to chat with over text? I mean, there's a whole range of people's expectations. And I think being able to set those expectations in a healthy way presents a challenge. And I think there's also, question of safety. So we know there's, risk of elder abuse. That could be emotional, that could be physical, that could be verbal, that could be sexual. But financial exploitation is by far the most common form of elder abuse. About 71% of elder abuse is financial exploitation. So I think a lot of older adults are also approaching the dating scene with some level of caution and skepticism.
Well, and with what you just described too, do older adults also have the same anxiety of having to put yourself out there again as when, you're in 20s, 30s, 40s?
Yeah, absolutely. Do you want to take this, Joe?
No, go ahead, Kristina.
Okay, yeah, no, I think that there is a lot of hesitation, right? And I think one thing you mentioned was the Golden Bachelor. And while I think ABC may have been aiming to kind of break stereotypes by presenting the Golden Bachelor, I think they also reinforce some harmful and unrealistic expectations of what dating should look like in older age, right? So
Right.
people who are athletic and with perfect bodies, and when you have a popular television show showing that, I think that reinforces some of the anxiety that people might have about going back into the dating scene, because maybe their body doesn't look like that anymore, or maybe their body doesn't work like that anymore.
Right. And Chip,
I'm
you want to
so glad
respond?
Kristina said that. Yeah, no, I think I agree completely. I found the show to be unfortunate in certain ways because as we get comfortable in our own skin, it starts to sag.
Mm.
And these women who were competing didn't have a whole lot of sagging skin. The reality is, I think one of the beauties of getting older and dating is you start to actually maybe not judge yourself by your body quite as much. You see that there are other values, whether it's your
Mm.
heart or your soul or your mind or your relational capacities or your cultural curiosity or your spiritual curiosity. There are a lot of things that get better with age. And I think for some people, if they continue to try to play on the playing field of the body and looks, that's a difficult playing field to play on as we get older. And so can be a little bit of a relief for both men and women that when you actually meet somebody, you don't feel like you have to like hold your stomach in on your first date the whole time,
Right.
or you don't have to feel like you're perfect. You're just going to show up with who you are, and
Mm.
hopefully they'll do the same. And it's actually a bit of a relief for a lot of people
Mm.
as they're dating in later life.
And
And I think another form of that relief is also that when you are younger, many people are dating with the expectation of finding a life partner with whom to raise children, right? And
right.
that they may have more stringent criteria for, I want them to have this value about religion, or this value about financial management, or this value about, how we're going to choose to, force our children to play an instrument or go into sports, et cetera, et cetera. And I think when you're older and that overarching question about children isn't there, it gives you a little bit more freedom
Mm.
to explore relationships that you might have not felt comfortable exploring in that younger stage.
Well, and we definitely want to go deeper into those goals and also that freedom that you get when you're older and with your life experience. But definitely want to touch on too, with the changing playing field. Every year there's a different app out there where you can find your soulmate, right? So they
Yeah.
say. So what do we know about how older adults are navigating that world? That dating environment where dating apps are the main way that we meet people.
I think one of the challenges with dating apps is that they focus a little bit more on the tangible qualities, your height, your age, your race, where you live, etc. And at the end of the day, I think as we get older, the intangibles, the personality type, the character qualities, the perspective on cohabitation or kids. I mean, because that is something that we bring into a relationship often when we're dating later in life is, do we want to live together or do we want to live separately? How do we deal with adult children or, actually children who are not adults who we still have in our lives? And so I think it's more complex than most dating apps allow for. But the beautiful thing about a dating app is it actually shows who's out there. And so it's a nice starter, but just know that the conversations you are meant to have in your first or second date are meant to go a little deeper than what a typical dating app allows for.
And I will note also that only about 26% of folks over the age of 50 who are seeking a relationship actually use an app. So a lot of older adults are using other means of connecting with other people.
And we'll definitely get to that too, because we're going to be hearing from voices of people who are dating right now, and we do know a lot of people do end up meeting their partners online. And we're going to hear right now from Jenny Douglas from New York, who describes her experience with online dating. Let's take a listen.
Kent's profile picture came up on my phone one morning when I was least expecting it. And I had decided at that point that I was feeling a little bit weary of online dating. And so I had actually taken myself off of the apps, but I got this email from OkCupid, even though I was no longer on the app, suggesting 3 men that might interest me. And sort of almost despite myself, I clicked on this profile, and it was just so sweet and beautifully written and tender and wry that I had to respond. So I just sent him a quick little message that said, "You're cute!" exclamation mark on it. And then I happened to be with my parents in upstate New York for July 4th weekend. This was 2014. And I went and had breakfast with my mom and dad, and then noticed my phone about an hour or two later, and there was a message from him back, and we ended up having a date in Brooklyn maybe a week later. And I was so entranced the moment. I mean, it's so funny because I had never really believed in the idea of falling in love. I mean, with the kind of depth that I fell in love with Kent. So I saw him, my knees buckled. We were at this bar with no name. It was actually called Weather Up, but there was no name on the outside of it. And I saw him standing at the bar, and I nearly canceled because I'd had a series of not great first dates that had started out promisingly. And I just was like, oh, I don't know if I could take the possible disappointment again of like a first date that I had thought might be promising. But I saw Kent, my knees buckled. I curtsied before we ever even spoke. And I just knew something on that very first date that I had not known in any first dates I'd ever had before meeting him.
And so hearing from Jenny's amazing story, I feel like I feel like it would resonate with a lot of us. I think the curtsying is pretty amazing, but like,
don't you love that?
And I think the beautiful thing is like you can hear her smile while she's telling the story, really. And it sounds like everyone has to deal with the same kind of pressures of dating apps. And Jenny said it herself that she wasn't sure if this was going to be a thing, but then she saw a picture of Kent and was like, oh my God, I gotta go meet him. So can you talk about figuring out what prompts and pictures to post, which can be really overwhelming because it's almost as if you're trying to sort of play with the algorithm of people, so they say. Mm-hmm. I don't know if Chip, you want to start with that?
I'll start. Okay. Yeah. Knowing that if you're looking for just a date to like go out for 1 or 2 dates, then there's one strategy. But I don't think that's most of us. Most of us are really looking for maybe a long-term relationship or somebody we can go out with for multiple times. So I think the more authentic and transparent you are, both in your picture, although, you can you want a picture that makes you look good. So let's start with that. But you also don't want something that's going to surprise people when they actually meet you because, oh my God, that's a picture from 12 years ago. Right. So it should be relatively recent. It should also show you in maybe doing something that you love doing, because whether it's, out backpacking or being at the theater or working with, young kids in some kind of volunteer program, that's where your personality is going to shine through. So, and a picture's worth 1,000 words. So, but I would also just say the more honest you are about why you're on the dating app, you can actually be awkward about saying like, it feels weird to be here, but like, I I feel like I'm at a stage where I'm ready again. I have been married before, and it's been 5 years since I have dated, and I'm coming back out into the market again. And so when I would read something like that, I would say like I can sort of hear this person talking to me, and they're sitting right next to me. So the more you go from that point of view, where you're almost speaking to someone who you already know, the better.
Right, and I think there's nothing like a little awkwardness to do a little ice
Yeah.
breaking. I think, and Dr. Zdanys, earlier we talked about a lot of people do not go through the app. So I want to listen to play another clip here where we talk about online dating is usually the name of the game when it comes to finding a new partner. But when our senior producer Tess Terrible talked with these folks, a lot of these older adults did not find their match online. So we're going to hear from Barb Beck, who is a relationship and life coach.
I was helping my son look for a wedding suit. He was getting married in a couple of months. And we went into a beautiful Italian luxury store on Broadway here in Portland, Oregon. Just actually not because we thought we could afford anything, but because he wanted to try on a Hugo Boss suit to see what it looked like. And my now husband opened the front glass doors, and we looked at each other and went, "Oh my God." And it was just, we laughed because my son's name is Seth, and told Brian, my husband, "Hey, I think we just would like to try on a suit if you're okay with that." And he was like, "No problem." And he grabbed as many suits as he could find for him to try on, and we shoved him in the dressing room. And we just kept asking him to go try on something else so we could keep talking. And it just went from there. A lot of people, especially women, say to me, "Oh my God, please tell me I don't have to get on the dating apps. I really just want to meet somebody organically." And I am proof that that could happen. But I will tell you what I find is that fear right there, that hesitancy right there, it actually kind of blocks being able to meet somebody organically. I find that if somebody can find the willingness to just be open and out there and make sure that they're being open-minded and that their body language is open and that they get on the dating apps and are basically, showing themselves in the universe, "I'm open, I'll meet somebody any way that it wants to come into me."
And so here we just heard Hugo Boss literally open doors for Barb and Brian here. Dr. Zdanys, I want to talk about dating after being in a long relationship can it be especially challenging, and Barb sort of talked about that fear here. So can you talk about what it's like to date post-divorce or perhaps losing your spouse?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, I think in both of these vignettes that we've listened to, which were both so beautiful in their own ways, and there's a few things that stand out. I loved what the woman was saying about just having that openness and authenticity, which when you're scared is really difficult to do, right? But I think walking into a store and suddenly meeting somebody is not a typical story, but I think having an openness to engage in activities that are meaningful for you can actually lead you in that direction. So whether you consider joining some volunteer groups, taking some classes that are of interest to you, going to your library, going to participate in advocacy about a cause that is really important to you, going to the gym or engaging in other recreational activities or religious groups are different ways that provide structure to get out there, and will help lead you to like-minded people. So if you can take that authenticity and go into those situations, I think that there's a good chance that you might connect with somebody meaningfully.
And we're going to play another clip here. We're going to hear from Nancy Kessler from Sandy Hook, who shares about some of the things that surprised her about dating at this age.
I think the biggest surprise to me was that in the past, a lot of my relationships have been contentious, and I've been wanting to change the other person. And I don't want to change myself or my partner. And I think it's vice versa. So I find that very refreshing, because a lot of the things that I might have argued about in the past are just things that really don't matter. Like, what you see is what you get at this age, and everybody has baggage. So yeah, you have to go into it saying, like, I'm not going to change this person.
So I want to ask both of you to respond here. Let's start with Dr. Zdanys. I think we talked a lot about authenticity in the last couple of minutes, and it seems like that's what Nancy is saying here. What do you think about that?
No, I think it's very true, right? I think when you can peel back sort of the face that you think the world needs to see, that allows you to be true to yourself, and being true to yourself will help you find people who love you and appreciate you just as you are. And that really is the foundation of a solid relationship.
Chip, anything from Nancy's story that jumped out to you?
Oh yeah. I mean, first of all of the people who we're hearing right now are MEA alums, so I love them all. And it's great to hear their stories, and I know Nancy well. Expect baggage. That's like, I would start with that. We all have baggage, and as we get older, we're carrying more of it around. So by the second or the third or the fourth date, maybe you get into a baggage conversation and you say, so like, based upon past relationships, what's some baggage that you feel like you have that, that we want to like explore, or you want to actually talk about? And, again, it being vulnerable as early as possible will, I think, help you determine, as long as you feel safe. Let's start by saying that you have to feel safe. But it allows you to get to a deeper place more quickly. And that will help you to determine, whether your potential partner here is willing to go there as well. Especially for a woman speaking with a man, because men have a tendency to have a harder time going to vulnerability. So if you can find a man who understands his own baggage, and is willing to talk about it, that's actually a pretty good sign.
And we're going to take a quick call here and a quick note for our listeners that you can join the conversation. Leave us a comment on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. Before we go to break, I want to bring in Valentina, who is calling in from Farmington. Valentina, you're on the air.
Hi, thanks for taking my call.
Sure, go for it.
So I am in my late 30s, but I've generally dated about 30 years older than myself because I just never had the patience for people my own age. That's changing a little bit. Like, I'm trying to actively aim younger these days. But one of my biggest takeaways with dating in general has been that as a culture, we spend a lot of time and energy on doing and getting things, and we don't spend as much time and energy on introspection and valuing other human beings. And dating is where that's become the clearest to me, because even dating people a lot older than me who are accomplished and have degrees and have professional careers, for some of those folks, it's like they've put all their energy into that and haven't put as much energy into kind of really having experiences and discovering who they are and what they want, and like the reality of what they value, not what they think they value, but what they've discovered through the experiences that they've had in their life.
Well, thank you so much, Valentina, for taking the time and sharing your story with us. We really appreciate it. Just a quick response here, Dr. Zdanys, anything that Valentina said that jumped out to you?
Yeah, well, I think it's also important to think about a few of her points. I think one is having that level of introspection does come with maturity. And I think that can be valuable when we're talking about the dating scene for older adults, right? So they've lived through a lot, they've learned from their experiences, and that can facilitate connection. But I think another thing that's important to talk about is, when we've had this conversation thus far, we've been talking about people who may be widowed or divorced. But there's also a cohort of folks in their older years who perhaps have never been married or in a sustained longitudinal relationship because they've been acquiring the degrees and engaging in their work so diligently. And now it's an opportunity for them to explore that part of their lives that maybe they hadn't previously. And I think that's important to acknowledge as well.
Definitely, and that's something that we will be talking about after the break. You've been listening to Dr. Kristina Zdanys. She's an associate professor of psychiatry and division chief for geriatric psychiatry and behavioral health at UConn Health. You've also been listening to Chip Conley, who's the founder and CEO of the Modern Elder Academy. They'll be staying with us as we continue our conversation about dating when you're an older adult, and we want to hear from you. Find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. This is Where We Live from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Catherine Shen. Today, we're talking about dating and falling in love during midlife and beyond. With us is Dr. Kristina Zdanys. She's an associate professor of psychiatry and division chief for geriatric psychiatry and behavioral health at UConn. And we also have with us Chip Conley, who's the founder and CEO of the Modern Elder Academy. And listeners, let us know if you're dating right now, if you want to share your story. Find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. And also another quick note for our listeners that in this segment, we will be talking about sex and intimacy. So, Dr. Zdanys, I want to start with you. We talked a little bit about this earlier when we're thinking about compatibility with dating. You know, things like whether someone wants children, also their politics, religion, and even educational background. So, can you talk about how do those expectations change as we get older?
Sure. Well, I think, as we said, as people get older and they start dating, some of those things like politics or religion become less important. But I think another important component is understanding one's goals in terms of sexual activity in the relationship, right? So over 50% of partnered adults in the 65 to 80 age group are sexually active. Over the age of 76, it is lower. It's about 25%. But 75% of older adults say that they are satisfied with their sex life or lack thereof. And I think part of this also goes down to that gender divide that we discussed. So we know that sexual function can change as people get older. Women after the age of 50, they tend to have decrease in libido. They also may have hot flashes, vaginal changes, weight gain. So, body changes that can impact their sexual experience. Men also can certainly have erectile dysfunction, prostate changes that can impact their sexual activity. But in general, their sexual activity is able to be sustained a little bit longer. And in both cases, for men and women, things like heart disease, diabetes, depression, and even the medications that they take can impact their sexual performance.
And Chip, I want to ask you to respond to that too, with what Dr. Zdanys just said. Is that something that you're seeing as well?
I think what I've seen is the definition of good sex changes. And what I mean by that is, especially for men, men are so performance driven. They're so focused on, the fireworks, the orgasm, all the kinds of things that, quite frankly, are somewhat juvenile. They learn these things. They learn these things at age 13, and at age 53, they still have the same definition of what is good sex. But right. I think what happens in one's 50s is you start to realize that sensuality, being sensual with someone, is as valuable or interesting as sexuality. And meaning that how you feel, giving someone a massage, or getting a foot massage, or just basically being affectionate and making out at the end of a great romantic movie. These are the kinds of things that can actually give people a greater sense of sensual pleasure. Taking a bath together, with some beautiful music playing. So I think the idea of what is sex and what is romantic intimacy becomes more and more important because we have to be a little bit more creative.
And as we're talking about this topic and how it could change and not change for some people in terms of conversation and definition, which is such a great angle to think about, is we know that sex can be a bit of a taboo topic, but we're also hearing that the older adults that we spoke to did not shy away from talking about this at all. So here we're going to hear from Reverend Dr. Deborah Hafner, who is a sexologist and minister from New York.
So I don't have a problem talking about sex ever because I've been a professional sexologist for 48 years now. So it is not a taboo topic for me. Many of the so-called obstacles just really aren't there. In falling in love, one still, no matter what your age is, you still experience lust. You still experience the thrill of looking at your beloved across the room and thinking, "Oh my God, he's so cute," and then I want this person. In many ways, we are having the best sex of our lives. And I think it's because we are so committed and so in love with each other that for the first time in my adult life, sex and love are actually the same thing. And yeah, there's some things that as you get older, you have to pay attention to. We joke about, when we wake up in the morning and our necks are stiff or our backs are sore or that, maybe we need to go take a warm shower together first to warm up our muscles. I think as one gets older is probably a little less acrobatic because of those physical things. But the ability to really be with somebody and talk about what you want, what feels good, what would feel better, to try new things, to be with a new partner is incredibly exciting and frankly thrilling. So I think I can honestly say that I'm probably having the best sex I've ever had.
So, Dr. Zdanys, especially with what we were talking about earlier and what Chip mentioned too, sexuality and sensuality, and we're talking about intimacy, and it's often, but not always, a part of dating for a lot of couples. But having just heard from Reverend Deborah, I want to know, what do you want our listeners to know about navigating sexual relationships at any age?
So I think taking ownership is important, right? You need to define for yourself what your own boundaries and expectations are regarding physical intimacy and stick with those and find people who respect those boundaries wherever they may fall, because on a psychological level, that's going to allow you to engage in the most meaningful attachment sexually, right? And that includes when you're dating, thinking about, do you want to set a parameter for monogamy, for example? I think that will put you in a better psychological space to be able to have a fulfilling sexual relationship. And the other thing I would say to our listeners is don't be afraid or embarrassed to discuss sexual health with your doctor. As a psychiatrist, I value when patients tell me that they're having a sexual side effect from their antidepressant, because I want to know that that part of their life is important to them. And there's also things I can do. I can prescribe a different antidepressant that doesn't cause sexual side effects, and that will improve their experience in their relationship. And by consequence, really, potentially improve their emotional health as well. So I think that's also critical, is to have an open conversation with your doctor.
Well, and I also think as we continue to be more open with our emotional health, there's also the physical health aspect as well that we've been talking about. And I know it's hard to make a broad generalization here, but can you also talk about, how is this different depending on gender identity or sexual orientation? Do the expectations line up here?
Right. Chip, why don't you take it?
I happen to be a gay man, so I figured I can speak to that. Most of what we've been talking about so far has been heterosexual relationships, and I think when it comes to relationships that are gay or bisexual or LGBTQ plus, the age becomes a particularly interesting dynamic because. Especially for gay men, you're sort of invisible. A gay man feels a little bit like a straight woman in the sense that the society tends to value, the young and the beautiful, and in the case of men, brawn, and so there's a little bit of a sense of there can be a lack of confidence. If you're going back into the dating scene as an older man, and unless you're dating other older men. For women, for lesbians, it is a little bit less of an issue, and there's often even there's more tradition of dating across ages, and so some of the data has shown that, and so I think one of the things that's also interesting, I talked about age fluidity earlier. I mean, I think the gender fluidity is becoming more prevalent at MEA.
Right.
And as I was doing research for my book, Learning to Love Midlife, 12 Reasons Why Life Gets Better with Age, I found a surprising number of women over 50 who were open to and exploring bisexuality, the idea of being with a woman, and partly because the emotional value of their relationships with women are so great, and the number of available men is so low. And so I was surprised by how many women actually volunteered to say that they were dating women.
Hmm. And with that, you describing that, it was a surprising stat to learn. And as you speak with your friends at the MEA, what are you hearing in terms of what are they looking for? Are they looking for relationships or marriage or something more casual, or as you just mentioned, just wanting to have that emotional connection with somebody else?
Here's an interesting statistic. The cohabitation rate for couples over 50 quadrupled between 2000 and 2020, while marriage rates in that same group was steady. So what we're seeing is non-traditional relationships. We're seeing people be less inclined to say, okay, let's jump into a marriage, especially if they've been married once or twice or more before. They're a little bit more focused on, okay, let's explore what it means to be in this relationship. Let's maybe actually live together part-time. Let's take vacations together. In some cases, let's be polyamorous. And so what I've been surprised by is just the variety of kinds of relationships that are happening after age 50. And again, that's why I suggest that creativity is probably wise, and trusting your own instincts, because after 50, you're not necessarily trying to impress your friends or satisfy your parents anymore.
Well, and I think as society moves forward, we're kind of slowly getting out of the box. I think that has created for many of us, and as you mentioned just now, Chip, that sometimes marriage is not the end goal for a lot of people. So we're going to hear from Sunny Smith from Colorado, who talks about why her and her partner decide to live separately.
Let's see. I guess what I would say is that, as I alluded to, one of my core values is to keep desire with a capital D alive in the relationship. And it was very clear to me from the beginning that living together would pull us down into this quotidian world of mundane logistics and would be a source of unnecessary friction, since our domestic lifestyles are quite different. And so by living in our own homes, we take care of those details when apart, and we send each other loving, creative, and intellectually stimulating texts every day, and then come together with a freshness and joy twice a week where we can enjoy our different living situations. And so as a result, there are so many beauties of being in love later in life, being both semi-retired, and we can spend long mornings in bed, and go out dancing, play music together, go on nature adventures, So it's quite wonderful living apart.
So, Chip, earlier we talked about creativity and sort of getting out of that limitation, with what Sunny just shared. Is this something that you're hearing more now?
Yeah. It's been interesting how the segues to these clips are perfect.
Definitely. I know. I was thinking the same thing.
Yeah. And again, it's all five of these women are MEA alums. So it's so great to hear their stories, because we need to hear more of these stories. For so many people after age 50, they sort of swallow their words when it comes to talking about romance or sex or what they're even yearning for. So I think because we live earlier in our life, sort of on a path that feels rather narrow, after 50, that path widens, partly because we care less about what other people think about us. And I guess also because we need to actually be open to new kinds of experiences. One of my favorite films of the last few years was Emma Thompson in that film, oh gosh, oh God, it's Leo Grand. It's Here's to You, Leo Grand, or something like that. And she, in her early 60s, after having been married her whole life and only had sex with her husband who passed away, she actually goes and finds a gigolo, biracial gigolo who's very handsome, who is less than half her age. They end up in a very emotional relationship. And the last image in the film is her in front of the mirror, Emma Thompson, the actress, looking at her body naked. And what I love about the film was she became emotionally naked in the film with Leo Grand, her lover. And by the end, she'd become emotionally naked also after having been a very um, sort of proper and um, traditional person. So I think the fact that we can blossom emotionally, sexually, spiritually as we get older suggests that we have the ability to become growing humans, not just aging humans.
And I think you can't ever really go wrong if Emma Thompson is in a movie, I feel.
Yeah, she's so good.
And I just want to give our listeners a quick reminder that you can share your story with us. I want to take a quick call from Diane, who is calling from New Haven. Diane, you're on the air.
Yes, I was just saying that I think one of the challenges, and I'm a mid-age African-American woman, is, you're not in the workplace every day. If you don't go to bars or you're out at restaurants, you're basically maybe going to a BJ's or a Costco. You'll see certain males, they'll look at you, they're in the age group you're interested in, and like we look and we don't say anything. And the hardest thing is how do you have that? How do you create a space to meet that man who is at that same point in his life when there is no longer the workplace? A lot of your friends who used to have get-togethers, some of them aren't even here, or they don't do those social activities. So my challenge is that I don't feel comfortable doing online dating. I just don't. I don't know why. But how do you create the space, or how do you find a space to meet someone? And you're looking for the companionship. You're not looking for the marriage.
Well, thank you so much, Diane, for calling in and sending us over your question and sharing your story. Really appreciate it. Dr. Zdanys, we'd love for you to respond here. I think what Diane has shared resonates with a lot of people, and we talked a little bit about it earlier, where not everyone has that organic experience. So how do you create that space when you're looking for companionship?
Absolutely. Well, we mentioned earlier, opportunities to engage in activities or organizations that are meaningful can sometimes be helpful. I would also like to give a shout out to a relatively new phenomenon of speed dating in older adults. I know across the state of Connecticut, there have been several pop-up speed dating opportunities organized by senior centers and other organizations that cater to older adults, where you have an opportunity in a safe and structured space to meet a large number of people in a very short period of time. And can kind of just go for it. So that's another new phenomenon that we haven't touched on yet, but I think that could potentially be very fun and a way to meet a lot of people in an efficient, structured, and safe manner.
Well, thanks for sharing that. You've been listening to Dr. Kristina Zdanys. She's an associate professor of psychiatry at UConn, and you've also been listening to Chip Conley, who's the founder of the Modern Elder Academy. They'll be staying with us as we continue our conversation about dating when you're an older adult. Find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. This is Where We Live from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Catherine Shen. We're back with our conversation about love and dating in midlife. Still with us is Dr. Kristina Zdanys. She's an associate professor of psychiatry at UConn Health, and Chip Conley, who's the founder of the Modern Elder Academy. And so we ended the last segment sort of talking a little bit about speed dating. So we're going to do a little speeding through this last segment because we've had such a great time over the last two segments. Chip, last time we've had someone on from the MEA. Our topic was focused on ageism. Would love to have you speak a little bit about how tricky that can be when it comes to dating apps.
Yeah. You can be age fluid and not define yourself by a particular age, but the dating apps won't allow that. They will tell
Right.
you that you're supposed to give your age. Now, sometimes people don't give their true age. The bottom line is, what I found from our MEA grads is when we had conversations about this, is if someone feels like they have to lie about their age, then they probably are they're not they're not packaging themselves properly for the kind of long-term authentic relationship they want. So being honest about your age is essential. If someone doesn't want to date you because of your age, guess what? That's probably not, they would never have been, if you'd changed your age, if you'd said you're 5 years younger, they would have figured it out at some point, and
Right.
they probably are closed-minded. So bottom line is, don't feel like you have to lie about your age.
And Dr. Zdanys, I would love to get to loneliness a little bit here too. Can you talk about the benefits of companionship really at any age? And I think we've heard from listeners that that's what they're looking for is companionship.
Absolutely. So when we think about loneliness, that's it's an emotional experience, a distressing feeling that comes with this perception that your social needs are not being met by the quality of your relationships, right? So this is actually considered to be an epidemic, especially among older adults. About a third of adults in the 50 to 80 age group have high rates of social isolation. And loneliness is toxic to the body and to the spirit. So loneliness has the same impact on health as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. It increases stress hormone responses. It decreases immunity. People who are lonely are less physically active. They're more likely to have heart disease, stroke, dementia, and even risk of premature death. So while dating may fill an emotional need for older adults, it can also help them physically in that regard to cut back on that loneliness.
About 20 seconds here, Chip. Would love for you to also touch a little bit about companionship.
Social wellness is a thing. We get focused on personal wellness, our sleep, our food, our exercise, but we need to invest in social wellness. And yeah, I would highly recommend people look at The Good Life, a book by the Harvard professor Bob Waldinger.
All right, social wellness indeed. Thank you so much for that. Thank you to Dr. Kristina Zdanys, who's Associate Professor of Psychiatry at UConn Health. Thank you so much, Doctor, for being with us today.
Thanks for having me. Great to chat.
And also Chip Conley, who's the founder and CEO of Modern Elder Academy. He has a new book coming out called Learning to Love Midlife. Thank you so much, Chip, for spending time with us today.
It's an honor to be here. Thank you.
We hope you all have a fun time too. We got a comment from Neil from Danbury who wants to let Diane know, who called in earlier, Diane from New Haven. If you see someone in the BJs, talk to them. Parentheses, talk to me. He's also looking in Costco. So good luck to you, Neil. Good luck to Diane. Thank you so much for listening. I'm Catherine Shen. Today's show is produced by Tess Terrible. Our technical producer is Kat Pastor. Download Where We Live anytime on your favorite podcast app, and happy dating.